Hey everyone, I'm Armor Gaming, welcome back to my channel and welcome to Monster Analysis. Up for analysis today is a legendary water monster known as H2O Delirious. Delirious, out of his mind, brutal, relentless. This assassin will even kill his friends if necessary in order to get where he's going. Wow, here we have this little guy as a child, as a teen, as an adult. He definitely looks like a tough vicious monster, so let's check out his stats. His power comes in at 3003, which is honestly one of the lowest powers for legendary water monsters. In fact, it's the second lowest. He's only stronger than Lord of Atlantis, who, as many of you know, is one of the original legendary monsters. So it's kinda weird, his description calls him an assassin, yet his power is rather low. His life comes in at 27,747. And as of the time I'm recording this analysis, there are 17 water legendary monsters. This puts him in 11th place, tied with Frostbite. His speed is 3,432, and this speed actually puts him in 6th place, tied with Sphereness. And overall, considering water monsters, this is a really good speed, because the monsters faster than H2O would be Blob, Frostwrath, Kaolic, Anton, and Cabinfish. So every other water monster, besides Sphereness, who's tied with H2O Delirious, they're all slower than him. And I'm mentioning that because his skills, he has a lot of immobilizing skills, so we'll talk about that later. Unfortunately, his trait is not one of the best, it's immune to daze. And I say it's not one of the best because lots of water monsters tend to have freezing skills, so immunity to freeze would have definitely been a lot better, but nonetheless he was given immunity to daze, so that's that. So really quickly I'm gonna go over the default skills and the special. We have Delirious Scratch, Crazy Splash, and for his ultimate, Delirious Army. Deals very heavy special damage to all enemies, may stun and freeze all targets. This skill attacks multiple enemies, dealing 65 damage, and as for the negative effects this skill applies, it does both stun and freeze, which is really good. And the reason I say it's good, it might seem kind of redundant to have two immobilizing skills, but it's great because some monsters are immune to freeze, while other monsters are immune to stun. So having a skill that can do one or the other immobilizing effect, that is extremely good. Now currently for water monsters, the only water monster that's actually immune to freeze is Varuna, but if we talk about it in the context of Team Wars, you never know what the other element can be. If the other element happens to be like metal or earth for example, there's quite a few of those monsters that have immune to stun, and if you're fighting against a water monster with immune to freeze, while your ultimate Delirious Army can take care of both of them. And on top of that, even though this monster doesn't have the highest power, his damage is nice at 65, and it is special based, not water based. Now really briefly I'm going to talk about skills group 1. There's nothing really too interesting here with the exception of one skill. So we have H2O Scratch, Cranky Splashes, Comical Wave, and the only skill I really want to discuss is Cranky Splashes. Deals moderate water damage, removes 25% of stamina from target. You target a single enemy, dealing 35 damage, it costs 28 stamina, it has no cooldown, and it's a stamina drain of 25%. And the only reason I wanted to discuss this skill is because of that 0 cooldown and the fact that it removes stamina, specifically 25%. Now 25% might not seem like a lot, but you never know when that 25% can mean the difference between winning a game or losing a game. And again, this has a 0 turn cooldown, which means you'll always be able to use it. And as many of you know, no monster is immune to having their stamina drained, which means if you're going up against the General Thetis and you're faster than General Thetis, you'll be able to take away that 25% stamina, and that'll prevent General Thetis from doing stamina devours, which is basically General Thetis' main threat. Anyways, let's move down to skills group 2. We have H2O Scrape, deals heavy special damage, 55 damage, 28 stamina, no cooldown. Now this is a very vanilla skill. It doesn't deal any effect, it's not too weak, it's also not too strong, 55 damage is just right, the stamina cost is right, 28, but this monster isn't an attacker, so I really don't see any reason to be running this skill. We have a skill called Silly Splashes, deals low water damage to all enemies, may daze all targets, requires cooldown. This is an AoE dealing 30 damage, costs 35 stamina with a 4 turn cooldown, and this skill dazes all of the enemy monsters. Now daze is essentially 2 effects in one. It reduces the enemy's damage output by 25%, and at the same time it also reduces their accuracy by 25%. Overall, I would say this is a skill you may or may not want to run. In my experience, applying daze to the enemy monsters has definitely come in handy. Granted, the enemies still hit me more often than they would have if they were blinded. I did notice a considerable more amount of misses from the enemy monsters, and aside from that, when the enemy monsters did manage to hit me, they were dealing 25% less damage than they normally would have. Overall though, I would say this is a skill you may or may not want to run. Next we have Shut Up. Deals heavy water damage, applies stamina leak to target, requires cooldown. This skill targets a single enemy, dealing 50 damage, costs 28 stamina, and it has a 1 turn cooldown. So applying stamina leak to an enemy monster reduces that monster's stamina by 15% for the following 3 turns. On your typical legendary monster that has 140 stamina, draining 15% of their stamina is equivalent to draining 20 stamina points. So over the course of 3 turns, that's equivalent to draining 60 stamina points. So I like the effect stamina leak, and I like the low 1 turn cooldown as well as the stamina cost. The power isn't necessarily the highest, but of course it doesn't matter because this monster is not an attacker. So overall, this skill would be another skill that you may or may not want to use. So now we're down to skills group 3, and in fact the following 3 skills are the skills you want to use on this monster, and for the last skill it's honestly up to you. It can be any of the 3 skills I talked about in detail. Anyway, we start things off with H2O Laceration. Deals heavy special damage, removes 50% of stamina from target, requires cooldown. So this skill targets a single enemy, dealing 55 damage, costs 31 stamina, and it has a 1 turn cooldown. Now in my opinion this is a great skill for the same reason that Cranky Splashes from skills group 1 was a good skill. This skill removes 50% of stamina from the enemy target. H2O Delirious has a faster base speed than one common monster you'll always find in Team Wars, General Thetis. General Thetis has a base speed of 3,421. Now General Thetis, along with every single general, has the trait called Tough. When a monster has Tough, that means that negative effects are 35% less likely to land on them, which means if you try to freeze or stun General Thetis, there's a 65% chance you might miss. And if you do end up missing in Team Wars, there's a chance that General Thetis will do stamina devours and drain 100% stamina from all of your monsters, which many times can result in you losing the battle. So because H2O Delirious is faster than General Thetis and he has a stamina drain skill, that makes him really usable in Team Wars, especially because from my own experience, a lot of teams we go up against, they tend to have General Thetis on the defense team, and quite often you'll face off against a General Thetis that is already ranked up, because General Thetis was available in the team shop for as little as 800 coins at one point. So for those of you that were fortunate enough to breed H2O Delirious when he was available during the breeding events, and especially if you were fortunate enough to breed multiples of him, then this monster can be a prime choice for going up against all of those General Thetis. So this is definitely a skill you want to equip. As I already mentioned, all of the skills you're going to want to equip. So moving on, we have Psycho Slashes. Deals low water damage to all enemies, may freeze all targets, requires cooldown. This skill attacks multiple enemies, dealing 30 damage, costs 35 stamina, and it has a high fortune cooldown. And this is your typical AoE free skill we see on all water deny monsters. Now once again, in terms of water monsters and in terms of speed, this monster is tied for 6th place. Of the 5 monsters that are faster than him, Cavenfish, Anton, and Kaolic, all those 3 monsters have an immunity to freeze trait, and all those monsters also have immobilizing skills. But as far as Team Wars are concerned, you'll generally run into a Kaolic or a Cavenfish. If not, it's General Thetis or a ranked up Varuna. That's not to say you can't run into the other water legendary monsters, but those are typical monsters you'll find in Team Wars. Now if the enemy has a Kaolic or Cavenfish on defense, then you will have to be extremely careful, and H2O would probably not be your go-to water monster, because 1, they're faster than you, and 2, they're immune to freeze. However, Kaolic and Cavenfish haven't necessarily been the easiest monsters to rank up, and as I already mentioned, H2O Delirious, it depends when you're watching this video, he was available in a breeding event, so if you were able to get a few of him and rank him up, then he might actually be better, because his following skill is called Stunning Wave. And Stunning Wave deals heavy water damage, may stun target, requires cooldown. This skill deals 55 damage to a single enemy, it costs 31 stamina, it has a 1 turn cooldown, and it stuns. So once again, the only water legendary monster immune to stun would be Varuna, who has a base speed of 3,399. So if you were able to get H2O Delirious and rank him up, and you're going up against level 100 Cavenfish or Kaolics, you would be able to immobilize them with Stunning Wave. Now I've always maintained that it's not necessarily fair to compare a monster that's ranked versus a monster that's not ranked, even if it's easy to rank up a monster, so let's bring it back to level 100 monsters. And before that, let's just talk about the skill set for this monster. Like I already mentioned, I would run all of skills group 3, H2O Laceration, Psycho Splashes, and Stunning Wave. Psycho Splashes, as you know, is an AoE free skill, which is good. This is primarily good in player versus player, adventure map dungeons. In Team Wars, it's also a really helpful skill, but just keep note that there are lots of water monsters immune to freeze. Stunning Wave can help to immobilize those water monsters that are immune to freeze, and most of the time in Team Wars, it really does come down to 2 legendary monsters versus 2 legendary monsters. And because H2O Delirious has immunity to daze and not immunity to freeze, if you're using this monster, sometimes it will be more helpful to use Stunning Wave on the enemy water monster to immobilize it, instead of using Psycho Splashes to immobilize the enemy attacker, because if you allow that enemy water monster to get a turn in and it does an AoE freeze, chances are your whole team is going to be immobilized for 1 turn, so you have to be strategic about how you do your battles. H2O Laceration, as I already mentioned, is extremely good because it removes stamina, which means if you're going up against General Thetis, you'll be able to prevent it from doing stamina devours. How good is that? As for your 4th skill, it can be either Shush Up, Silly Splashes, or Cranky Splashes. And from these 3 skills, I really don't think one skill is better than the other. When you look at Shush Up, it does stamina leak, which may or may not come in handy, but looking back at skills group 3, both of these skills have a 1 turn cooldown, which means if you do Stunning Wave, you'll be able to do H2O Laceration, and then you'll be able to do Stunning Wave next turn, So if you wanted to, you could just cycle between these two skills during the duration of a match. The 1 turn cooldown is great. Plus when you stun a monster, they become immune to stun for the next turn, so that's when H2O Laceration can come into play. But when we look at the other 3 skills, that's not to say they don't have some advantages. Stamina Leak could help you against a monster that gets an extra turn like Voltic or Zyla, but at the same time Zyla and Voltic, because they are thunder, they would most likely take out your H2O Delirious. Nonetheless, it could still come in handy, especially if you give Stamina Leak to a monster, thus drain 50% of their stamina with Laceration, so that's an option. Silly Splashes gives daze to all of the enemy monsters, which can also come in handy, specifically because of that minus 25% accuracy. My only main argument against Silly Splashes is that I really don't see a time when you would use this skill, because you can imagine for the majority of the games, you're either going to start off with Cycle Splashes or Stunning Wave, and for the following skill, you're probably going to use the other skill, whatever you didn't do in turn 1. So I really don't see a point when having an AoE daze would come in handy, especially when you could have either a drain 50% stamina, or a skill that gives Stamina Leak if you choose that skill. So then that leaves Cranky Splashes, and if you're wondering, Armor, why would you want the skills group 1 skill that only removes 25% of stamina from the enemy target when you have a skill that removes 50% of stamina from the target? And my answer to you is the fact that it has a 0 turn cooldown. And this will primarily work once again when you're going up against a General Thetis, because if you face off against a General Thetis and you start the game off with H2O Laceration, thus draining 50% of the stamina, and then General Thetis gets a turn, and let's say it does Elite Sea Troops, thus recharging her stamina all the way up to 140, while your H2O Laceration is going to have a 1 turn cooldown, which means you'd be at risk for General Thetis doing her stamina devours once again, just in case you can't finish her off, which means if you have Cranky Splashes, you'll be able to drain 25% of stamina, thus preventing it from doing stamina devours once again. You could of course use Shush Up, but there is a 35% chance that Stamina Leak won't land on General Thetis, so again, that decision is totally up to you. You can run Cranky Splashes, Silly Splashes, or Shush Up for the final skill. The 3 skills I do recommend, however, are all of skills group 3. And even though this monster doesn't have the best trait, especially for a water monster, I would still say this monster is really good in Team Wars. H2O Delirious could have been fantastic if he did have immune to freeze, but I still do think he's a really good choice for Team Wars. So that is actually going to conclude my analysis on H2O Delirious, and now I want to hear from all of you guys. What do you think about this monster? Do you think H2O Delirious is good, or do you think he's not so good? How do you think he compares to the other water legendary monsters? Like always, let me know what you think in the comments below, and also be sure to let me know what monster you want me to analyze next. I hope everyone has a good day or a good night. Remember to dream big and pursue your passions.